of commissioning being structured in phases. We're in this sort of early phase, this pre-commissioning, which is happening now. There's a lot of preparatory work, developing tests, coming up with some, at least baseline observation plans, etc. Then the next phases are the actual conduct of the commissioning work. Phase one is with ComCam. Remind you that ComCam is an early instrument that goes on the telescope, which consists of a single science raft. Then the second phase is when we integrate the full science camera onto the telescope, and that the commissioning effort concludes with science validation effort, which is right now defined as a parallel. Just again, this is another look at how the commissioning effort is structured. So both for the early validation with ComCam and with LSST Cam, there's what I call a technical phase. That's illustrated here in gray. That is when the instruments themselves are being physically integrated onto the telescope and made to work, getting all the software interfaces ironed out, getting the optical performance of the system worked out. Each of those technical phases is followed by what I refer to as a sustained observing phase. This is indicated in blue. And we've talked about this previously, but for ComCam, we have 3 4-week periods outlined. The first is focused on verifying and validating key performance metrics, either derived out of the science requirements document. Second observing campaign is to take a small number of fields on the sky and take them to equivalent of a 20-year survey depth for exploring the effect of various conditions and systematics in the data. And then with ComCam, we have a scheduler test where we try to validate scheduling algorithms that we use to select fields that are targeted during the survey. All these tests get repeated at some level with the LSST Cam, where with ComCam, it's just an initial test, mostly around on axis, and then the emphasis, of course, with the LSST Cam is validating all these performances over the full field of view. And then lastly, we conclude with a pair of mini surveys. Survey 1 is a wide area. There's more detail on that coming up. And the wide area survey is really meant to test the prompt processing for generating alerts. And then the second survey is meant to test the data release processing with, again, taking a limited number of fields to the full 10-year stack depth. So a bit more on the science validation surveys, because this, I think, some of, I'll get to it in a moment, but this is the current plan. I think it's a solid plan, but it is not where we look and how we look on the sky. It's not engraved in stone at this point in time. As I said, we have 2 6-week continuous scheduler-driven surveys, and exercising the prompt processing and the data release processing pipeline, comprehensive characterization of the bulk data acquired under novel observing conditions, and then also trying to identify corner cases with the age of larger statistical samples. Those are sort of objectives. Wide area survey 1, as you saw in the over here in the green, it's split up into 2 components. One is early, and that is meant to gather data that will produce a set of templates. So once we make those observations, there's required some amount of time to process those observations into the templates. While that processing is going on, we conduct a second mini survey, and then on the conclusion of that second mini survey, come back to mini survey 1 and run it for 3 weeks, run it and processing the prompt processing as we would in normal operations. So in just rough estimate by what do we mean by wide area, so we roughly in 3 weeks' time, we can cover around 1,600 square degrees, 15 visits by 6 filters, and generating roughly 30,000 visits over 40 nights in the 2 phases. So I said phase 1 is making templates. Phase 2 is running the profit processing. So again, as I say in the observations bullet here, location and distribution on the sky is TBD. We have not said exactly how those 1,600 square degrees are going to be distributed on the sky and exactly where they are. I'll come back to that in a moment when we talk about providing input to the commissioning plan. Second mini survey is 10 years. Again, we could do about 300 square degrees over 40 nights, get 825 visits per pointing with all 6 filters. Again, I'll emphasize location and distribution on the sky is still TBD. So these are the key dates and the current forecast. These have changed slightly since you last saw them. Primarily, the OX telescope has pushed out somewhat. This is when these are start milestones. So this is when the start of data acquisition can be expected. Bob has a follow-up slide that says basically when the data from each one of these phases will be made available in a general way for the community. So first question here, now with that brief introduction, how, where, what are we going to observe? So that is the area that's highlighted with the red box around it. These are all the extended observing campaigns that we have planned in commissioning. And as I said before, we have not concretely settled on exactly where and what we are going to observe. The how is somewhat constrained a bit by what the commissioning team has to do to run their verification validation tests. But there will be other opportunities to do other kinds of observing. And so let me give an example or where input could be welcome. The 20-year depth test. The observations that are going to occur when we do that will never occur during the 10-year survey, right? So we're talking about over a 1-month period taking of order 10 to 12, 10 or a dozen fields and continuously observe them to produce 1,700 visits. The time sampling of that data will be truly unique and will have some very interesting features to it. And so, where we look, what fields we look at should be thought about fairly carefully. And both from a science validation point of view, but also from just a general scientific interest. Because those data will get released. I have no doubt there will be science in those data. So some of the field identification has started. Keith Bechtel, who's leading up the science validation effort for the commissioning team, along with Andy Connolly, here in the room right now. We have identified some obvious places on the sky on where we want to do some of the science validation and verification observations. Obviously, the deep drilling fields that we have already selected are on the list. There's the footprint for DES, HST data, there's CFHT legacy, there's the Hybris Green Camp data, but this is not meant to be an exhaustive list. So that's why I say it's ongoing, but not done yet. So how can you, the science collaboration chairs, and your associated collaborators help out and provide input? So Chris Walter for the Dark Energy Science Collaboration led a commissioning sort of mini workshop at the last desk meeting and has started to put together the desk's input on where and how they would like to see observations conducted during commissioning. And Federica and I talked while we were we met in Chile, that we would like to give the science collaborations the same opportunity. And so Federica has created a Google form that largely mimics the input data the desk commissioning working group generated. And I'm going to go there now. So this is what that form looks like. And the first question I have for this form, so this is Federica's form, I will not take credit for it, is if you look at this form, do we have the right entries in this form? Is there other information we should be including? So we have one, I think it's interesting to know which science collaboration is putting data into this form, what the scientific topic is. Does the field have a name or just a short description? Where that field is, RA deck. Again, a description of kind of what that field consists of. What's the motivation behind selecting that field? Which filters you would want data in? The comparative depth in survey years for that field. Cadence or depth and magnitude, you can do it either way. Cadence, there's wide, fast, deep drilling, special, or other. And then whether or not there's available archival data for that. So I'll pause there and give Federica any room for any additional comments she would like to make.
No, I think you covered everything. If you guys think that there are other relevant information that should be on the form, both project and the science collaboration chairs, let me know. I will add them. Most of the information is mandatory, so to process the form, but there's always like an option other when there is a multiple choice. So if your idea doesn't fit in a single science collaboration, there's an other, and you can explain. And there's a couple of options to enter identification of field and things like that.
So one of our objectives with this form, when you hit submit down here at the bottom, or there's supposed to be a submit somewhere. Send. You hit the send button up here. The contents that you filled out in this form will become a row in a spreadsheet. And we'll make that spreadsheet available as well, so people can see what others are suggesting. And the idea is that over time, this spreadsheet will have many, many rows in it. And the commissioning effort, I have to emphasize this as well, the commissioning effort is making no guarantees that a given row in that spreadsheet will be carried out. But
Chuck, you are looking at the editing version of that form, so and they wouldn't have edit access, so they will actually see the submit at the bottom, and the URL will be different. But I'm going to ask Rampal in a second. I'm going to give her a URL to get a short URL that starts with ls.st, etc. as usual. So that will be in the chat in a minute.
Okay, great. Thank you, Federica. But I'll say that for a lot of sort of some of the technical observations and the technical verification tests that we're going to be doing in commissioning, from a technical point of view, we're rather agnostic about where we look. Right. So, but sometimes, as I said earlier, how we look is going to be driven by the specific test that we make. But this is a way, I think, we tried this, several years ago at one of the all hands meetings. We had a similar forum, and it was just too soon in the timing of things. I think we're getting close enough to where we're going to start collecting real data with the system that now is kind of an opportune time to start providing this kind of. Let's get back to full screen. Now, so the next, so I'll pause here on this soliciting some, suggested inputs from the the larger community if there's questions or comments. But I think the project would welcome to have some, because we can just cordon ourselves off and say, okay, no, we're going to just do our own thing. But I think since we are going to make this data available, and Bob's going to talk about it in a moment, I think it would make it beneficial for the extent that the science collaborations have time to do it, to provide us with some input. So on that note, I think this is where Bob picks up.
So just to be clear, then there's going to be a very clear demarcation between what happens between the commissioning team and the pre-operation. And that is the data that are taken by the commissioning team will be processed by the commissioning team, and certain data products will be made. And once those are made, then the pre-operations team has the responsibility of serving those data to the community. At this point, the community is whoever has data rights in survey operations would be the same community that gets access to commissioning data that time. So that's what I just said on the first bullet there. The commissioning team will fully verify and validate any data products that they choose to make available to the operations team for serving to the community. So it's kind of up to the commissioning team not only to take and process the data, but decide which data will be put out data available. So we, of course, will also be looking to use these data to test the operations and the procedures for making data available during the survey as the operations team. So it's not just, end result is not just to put out data that's of scientific interest to the community, but to actually make sure the operations team understands how they will do this during the survey. We're actually calling each data release a scenario, so it's kind of like a plan of what we would do. It's kind of a shared risk type thing. And so let's talk about what those are. In the beginning, the operations team would envision serving at a minimum flat bits files. It could be images and catalog data. That might be in the very beginning of the survey period.
So that's single frame images and catalog, single visit images.
And yeah, that might actually some of those formats might be the most useful for different scientists in any case. But as we go forward, we will, of course, start serving the data in ways that look more like how it will happen through operations phase. So we will be serving data from both the science validation observations carried out with ComCam and the LSST Cam. We hope to start as soon as we can with the science user interface and then move to the full science portal. We'll see how that goes as we get closer to actually doing this. The schedule and the scope of the data scenarios will probably evolve as commissioning proceeds. That's just recognizing that commissioning itself will probably evolve as we get closer to it. Plan for it, and then actually we started developing a document which was not yet available, but will be at some point, which will discuss not only the scenarios for this period of commissioning and science validation, but how we go forward survey with data. That's called LSO 011. As we go forward into the future, you'll start seeing more documents with these three-letter acronyms that you haven't seen before. This one has LSST Science Operations, which is one of the main partner operations. Documentation will be an important part of this. We'll obviously want to produce and conserve documents along with the data in the commissioning period. We haven't worked this out in detail yet with the commissioning team. Obviously, the commissioning team will be very busy, but they will also be the people that know most of the information that would go into any document or documents. So the idea is that somehow we will help generate documents that will perhaps be drafted by the commissioning team, maybe continual improvement by the operations team, and then put out. It is certainly true that the operations team will have some sort of help desk / user support responsibility in commissioning. So we'll be working closely with the commissioning team to understand what's happening so that we can help inform the users who are starting to use the data. And everything will evolve. All these aspects will evolve so that the idea is that by the time we start the real survey on October 1st, 2022, it will just look like we're no longer in commission operation. That's the goal. The scenarios, so each scenario is a possible data release schedule or timeline for what we would produce and when. The current plan has 3 scenarios for pre-operations, which are aligned with the activities that Chuck went through with the ComCam, LSST Cam, and the mini survey. So again, the flat files and involves toward supporting data just through the Data Access Center at NCSA with your science platform. Excuse me. Plan to get point as soon as we can, but we have not identified or even put a stake in the ground yet on when that will. We have to do more work on actually understanding how we're going to get through this. So the first scenario would be related to the regular ComCam. The imaging data would be released 6 months after the data taking with ComCam are complete. We're saying right now no later than 6 months, and the catalog is 3 months later. We hope that these are conservative dates right now, and that the best effort will be to do whatever we can sooner than that. We'll just have to wait and see as the planning and actual data taking go forward. For scenarios 2 and 3, we hope to do a full release of whatever products are available 6 months after the data taking phase is complete for that phase. So data quality, just a few thoughts there. Responsibility of the commissioning team to ensure whatever data quality and commissioning is done and validation. Which data are released, or again, will be subject to the project to review. It's probably not a surprise that we're going to say that not all commissioning data we take will be released. It will be released as shared risk for scientific use, and feedback will be received, and we definitely want it, but we have not yet defined exactly how that will happen. So if we look at the actual scenarios, so the ComCam data scenario should provide data in the 4th quarter of 2021. The data taking ends in June. We would start releasing image data in December, and then have the full catalogs that we're continuing to produce, of course, from that data in March. For the LSST Cam, quarter 3, 2022, the data taking ends right now on the schedule in December 2021, and we would do 6 months later full data scenario. And similarly for the mini surveys, quarter 4 of 2022, now we're running up close to the start of the real survey. When I wrote this, I assumed there would be between 1 and 3 surveys. Now maybe it's 1 and 2 surveys. And
It's still between 1 and 3. It's still a valid statement. Two is between one and two.
The expectation, I think, is there will be 2 surveys. Data taking would end in March and then would be up in September. Okay.
Okay.
This is, so Leanne is going to describe some of the data products that you can expect out of it.
We have 15 minutes left.
15 minutes left, okay, on track. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about some pipelines that we expect to run and data products, starting with top data products. We expect to run the processing pipelines during commissioning, including pre-recovery.
Leanne, it's very hard to hear. I don't know if it's just me, but I couldn't understand.
Hey, I'm actually the closest to the microphone. I need to speak up. Is that better?
Move your.
Is that better?
She's not on the camera.
Oh, okay.
She needs to
Sounds
speak.
okay.
Yes, it's better. Thank
I
you.
want to hear me and see me. Okay, so for the prompt processing pipelines, we expect to run the prompt processing, the moving objects pipeline, including pre-recovery, as well as alert generation and distribution during commissioning. The difference images will be produced as templates become available to subtract from. We expect to produce a mostly normal prompt products database as defined in the data products definition document. A couple of differences will be that obviously we won't have up to 12 months of difference image analysis source records. We will have whatever's available by that time. But otherwise, the structure should remain mostly the same as what's described in the DPDD. We won't obviously have a database, data release to link against, to link prompt products against. So our idea at the moment is that if the data release processing data products are available and in QSERV, we can attempt to do some linking. This also depends on the running of the data release processing pipelines during commissioning. So in terms of the alerts, we intend to make available an early alert stream of data. We expect this will be distributed, though, with substantial latency with respect to what is described in the science requirements documents. We won't be getting these within 60 seconds of the images being taken. The goal of this is primarily to familiarize the community with the planned format and content of the alert stream so that the community brokers can also start to prepare to receive LSST alerts in year 1 of operations. So the idea at the moment is that a best effort alert stream could be distributed around early August 2021. And then ComCam plus 3 months, we might be able to produce sample commissioning alerts and LSST CAM, or mini surveys plus 1 month, we could produce sample alerts again. Distribution mechanism is based on the Kafka Avro system that has been described in other documents. I can give references to that. This is currently being tested on ZTF and ingested by Antares and Marcel. For more information about this, though, I refer you to LDM 612. I won't go into any more information about this yet. So the alert packet in commissioning, what will it contain? So again, an alert packet, just to remind you, is a VO event packet format. This here shows you the description of the contents. I've cut and pasted this from the data product definition document. A couple of changes will be that for the SSO objects, we probably will only have the object record for known asteroids at that time. For the DS source records, we certainly won't have up to 12 months, but what's available we will attempt to include within an alert packet. And the matching object IDs from the data release, as we won't have a data release and commissioning, we will do what we can with whatever data products are available. In terms of the moving objects pipeline, we're thinking to run this during the mini surveys in Q4 2022. The goals here are to validate the solar system products pipeline and also test the linking software and, importantly, the interface with the Minor Planets Center. The prompt products produced from the moving objects pipeline is the solar system object table, which is described in detail in the DPDD. We expect this to be mostly the same as what's described in the DPDD, but probably only for known asteroids. Just to stress that these data products will not be produced with the operation zero latencies of 24 hours. They will be on a longer timeline than that. The goal is to try to familiarize the community with what will be coming. And for data release production, we will run improved versions of the LSST science pipelines as compared with what we have today for the HS7 processing. So as we build our science pipelines for the data release processing, we run them against the HSC data, we produce outputs, we do verification and validation, and these pipelines will continue to evolve up to and throughout commissioning. We expect many improvements from this throughout commissioning, especially improvements in the quality of the output of the algorithms, but probably not in the form of the outputs. So again, the goal is to familiarize the community with the form of these data products and how they will work with them. That aspect should change, but we certainly expect to see an improvement in quality throughout commissioning as we use the commissioning data to test data release processing. We expect to be serving these catalogs, the catalogs that are produced in the data release processing in the science data model format in the QServe database. And again, I refer you to the data products definition document, which has a full description of the schemas for all these data products.
Bob, this is your slide.
So just the lawyerly fine print, again, I think we've covered all this before. All the data releases are seen as operations or pre-operations activity, not on the MRHC project. Please expect and be willing to work with changes throughout the commissioning and early operations phases. The capability and level of the data access center will certainly evolve through this period, obviously with the requirement to be ready for the survey by the time we're through this period and hopefully gaining capability rapidly period. And we do not produce a rigid or rigorous release schedule, but instead we produce and talk about these release scenarios, which may or may not play out exactly like they've been out.
Okay. Which time do we have left?
We have 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Okay. So that's kind of the end of the commissioning data policy and what's available and on what time scale. I was going to conclude today with a discussion about getting more directly engaged with the LSST commissioning effort. So there's been a lot of discussions with various groups, both domestic and foreign. And we do welcome the idea of having external groups add value and complement the LSST commissioning team's capability. We know that a huge amount of data is going to get acquired and a lot of information will be potentially there in that data, but the commissioning team has a rather narrow focus to verify and validate the system, and there's obviously some interesting value add ideas that could be explored in the data. So some basic guidelines. So I think after conversing with Steve on this topic, we do not intend to issue a sort of generalized call to the community for engaging with LSST. It's going to be sort of self-organized, and we can talk about that more. But the project needs to reserve the right to decline any group's offer for any reason. The project can terminate a group's affiliation at any time due to poor performance or undue overhead. And to be clear, the project will not rely on the contribution of external groups to fulfill the core commissioning requirements to be operations readiness review. That is on us for the MRESC project. Some other stark realities here is for this engagement, I can't pay you. But you would be signing up to do real work on a schedule as directed by the LSST project commissioning team. And Steve and I agreed that the terms for doing this work should be set in some sort of formal MOU. And if you do get engaged in this way, you are expected to spend some amount of time at one of the primary LSST operation sites prior to and or during the commission period. And the carrot there is what's in it for you to agree to such terms. What's in it for you is that you get basic open access to everything you learn during commissioning without all the caveats that Bob just told you about. And then that gives you a leg up, gives you deep understanding of the LSST data before the survey starts. That's pretty much all we can offer. But I think there should be ample reward in that for you to think about getting it. I won't read through all of these. You guys can read through this. This is sort of some of the basic guidelines for engagement that Steve and I drafted. I will say that one of the, it's not really stated here, but I don't want to try to do this kind of agreement with external people to be part of what effectively is an adjunct commissioning team on an individual by individual basis. I do want to limit the number of point contacts the commissioning team is going to have. So I would rather this be, well, it has to be by a group, and then for each group, we would need to identify who the PI is for that group, and that PI would be the point person to interact directly with the commissioning team and help coordinate the work that group is signing up. And the last point at the bottom here, participation will be based on value added and capabilities to complement the existing LSST commissioning team. Here's just some example areas that I thought of. This is by no means an exhaustive list of the kinds of things that external groups could do that extend beyond the fundamental scope of what we, the construction project, have to do. So one example is conduct anomaly analysis on the engineering facility database. This database will be a mass database of basically all the housekeeping data of the technical properties of the system. It will be a very rich database to explore, looking for anomalies that could potentially have a signature in the data. Extended analysis to characterize system performance at the margins of operational parameter space. One of the things we would want help with is understanding where does the performance of LSST start to break down at the edge of operational parameters, because we're basically designed over a fairly wide band of nominal operational conditions, but we know that there will be moments when those conditions won't be met and we'll be operating outside those conditions. And so we need to understand what happens to the system. Another one is to evaluate the operational configurations as recorded in the engineering facility database of the observatory to determine optimal performance. You can think of the LSST system writ large as having a huge number of adjustable knobs on it. And the commissioning team will not have the capacity to exhaustively explore how to tune those adjustable knobs for optimum performance. We will certainly tune those adjustable knobs to meet the SRD requirements. And I suspect that as we learn more about the system, we can continue to refine the adjustment of some of the parameters to improve the performance above and beyond the SRD. Those are just some ideas. I know there are many other ideas that can come out of this concept, but this is give you a representative of what I consider to be value add above and beyond what the basic requirements of commissioning are.
Thank you, Chuck.
And there.
We have a number of questions that we cannot address right away because we're out of time, but I copied all the questions that were put into the chat window. I will pass them on to Chuck, Bob, and Leanne, and they'll send answers to Federica, who can then redistribute them to science collaboration chairs. Unless there is some super burning question and you will not be able to sleep. No? Well, thank you so much again. And Fed and I will remain in contact to decide on the next 3 presentations for the next 3 months. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, Jacques, you said you copied the questions because I won't have access to them after you hang up.
I did.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.